This week we're going to start with how I colour grade a typical shot, and then look at the creative application of colour effects in cinema. So I usually go for quite a neutral look, and in the last year I've come up with a default grade that I've used on pretty much every project. Here's how I do it. I bring in the Film Convert plugin, select the camera and the picture profile that I was shooting on, and then looking at the waveforms on the left, I can see that the skin tones are about here. So changing the exposure, I can find that midpoint between too dark and too bright. For this kind of thing I'm probably going for between 50 and 70 IRE. Then I choose a film stock to emulate, of which there are plenty of different options. Next, I'll reduce the curve setting until I'm happy with the contrast levels, depending on the scene and the look we're going for. I also check my colour temperature. In this case, it was a bit warm, and I then added a touch of saturation. But we really shouldn't rely on our eyes. The best way to analyse colour is to use a vector scope and a waveform. I'll embed a great video about scopes on the blog post in case you need an introduction. So I mask out the skin tones and then look at that line, which is the flesh tone indicator, to see that right here the skin tones are pushing too far towards red. So I add a bit of green to the highlights until the colour is sitting right on that line. Now this is really important if we're going for a natural look. It means there's no red or green tint in the skin tone, and this works for all ethnicities, by the way. So the majority of shots in the majority of movies are pretty precise about the skin tones being right on that line. And you can see it for yourself if you bring some screenshots of movies into your editor. So with a few final tweaks of colour temperature and contrast, that's my typical process I use for almost all of my neutral looking shots. Here's some before and afters. Now if you've been watching this channel for a while, you'll know that I've been using Film Convert for ages. But I do just want to make it clear and be honest with you that very recently I've started being paid by them when people purchase the plugin with the code DSLRguide for 10% off. So just so you know. Now, this neutral daylight look that we've been talking about isn't good for every single scene. Here's a screenshot from Skyfall, a massive blockbuster Bond film. It's fairly dark with blue tones. To me, the time of day looks like early evening, whereas this one from the same film is clearly earlier on in the day, right? Well, looking at the difference between the two shots and how they register on the scopes, we see that we can match them by increasing the exposure slightly, warming the colour temperature a fair amount, and going over to our colour board or colour wheel to add some extra orange into the shadows. And finally, getting a slightly flatter look by increasing the shadows and the midtones a bit. So now those are pretty much matched, and it looks like they both could have been shot at, say, 11 AM. We can make them both look like they were shot at dusk by taking the original daylight shot, darkening it slightly, cooling off the colour temperature and dropping the saturation a little bit. And then we head over to our colour board to add some extra blue into the shadows. And now I think that would cut pretty seamlessly with the original shot from the film. So how far can we take this? Well, here's a frame from Fight Club that feels really nice and grimy with dark, mouldy tones. But how much of that is down to the grading? Well, let's try and match it with this shot that's completely different. I start with my standard grade that I showed you at the beginning of the episode, and then I changed to a different film stock, and if I cool the colour temperature down, lower the exposure, and add some more contrast, as well as plenty of that fluorescent green tinge, then after tweaking things and going back and forth a bit, dropping the saturation, we can get the skin tones looking fairly similar, and the colour of the ground is close. But we can still see those rich green tones from the grass, which isn't nearly as grimy as Fight Club's almost colourless roads, wet with rain. We're also missing the fluorescent fixtures, the dumpsters, and the obvious one is that we can totally see from the sky that I was filming during the day. So I really like the colour in this shot, but we can't give all of the credit to the colour grade. It was the location scouting, the production design, the lighting and the costume that really hold the atmosphere of this frame. However, there are no rules in filmmaking. For example, in The Matrix they use pretty heavy, unrealistic colour grading in the scenes that take place in a simulation, separating them from the more natural, slightly blue look of the real world. Or in Monsters Inc. they use really cold colours for the low point of the film where everything's gone wrong, and again cold blue colours in a similar moment in The Incredibles. But then in another Pixar film, the moment where everything's gone wrong features really warm orange colours, the complete opposite to those other scenes. What that tells me is that, of course, there's never just one answer to a creative question, and it makes sense that visual emotions can't be fully explained with words, saying that green always means this and red always means that. So I suppose we have to look at the colours we see in paintings, films and photographs and try and draw inspiration from them when we're putting together the colour palette for our own films. My name's Simon Cade, this has been DSLR Guide, and I'll see you next week.